Proton pump inhibitors are among the most commonly sold medications, with omeprazole that was prescribed 45 million times only in 2023 in US, with almost 13 million patients. Some say that proton pump inhibitors are pretty safe due to their short half-life that is only hour long, but others say that it's not true, that they have adverse effects and we should not use them, for sure not for the long time. But before starting the whole debate about whether are they good or not, we need to explain how they work. First of all, proton pump inhibitors are used in gastroesophageal reflux disease that impacts many people. They are also used in peptic ulcers, functional dyspepsia, and infection with Helicobacter pylori. I mentioned omeprazole before. That's because it's the most common proton pump inhibitor type. What's also worth to mention is how they work. What's their mechanism of action? Stomach, to absorb minerals or vitamins or macronutrients, requires gastric acid to function. Of course, stomach helps with absorption of different molecules in intestines. It can ready them to be absorbed down the road in intestines. Mostly to absorb those things and to make them ready for absorption in intestines, stomach uses gastric acid. Gastric acid has really low pH, and stomach, when it digests food, it comes to 1.5 to 2 pH. That is really low acidic environment. And it does that to absorb, but as well to protect organism against germs, against infections. But unfortunately, gastric acid has its dark side, and the dark side is, for example, gastroesophageal reflux disease. When stomach content goes up, not down, it can cause different not good conditions in your esophagus. As well, if stomach acid works too long and gastric mucosa is not well protected, it will make gastric ulcers that are damaged in gastric mucosa. So gastric acid is fine as long as we can control its function, we can control its acidic pH. And when we can do that, there are things like gastric ulcers, gastroesophageal reflux disease, and other occur. In this video, I will not talk how it happens. I will mostly tell you how modern medicine tries to treat those conditions, and the most common medication for those, for increasing pH, so lowering acidic pH, are proton pump inhibitors. They are the most common ones. As well, they mostly superseded histamine 2 receptor antagonists that were blocking histamine receptors that eventually led to production of gastric acid. But proton pump inhibitors work by inhibiting proton pumps, structures that are part of parietal cells, the most important cells in stomach that produce gastric acid. So by inhibiting them, it's important that proton pump inhibitors inhibit those proton pumps irreversibly. So once when you block them, you need to make new proton pumps to decrease pH in your stomach. So parietal cells have blocked function of creating the gastric acid by proton pump inhibitors. And that's all that you need to know about their mechanism of action. Right now we will dive deep into adverse effects because there is a whole list of them. Of course, some of them have pretty good evidence. There are some that are really just speculations, but still there can be some truth in them. And worth mentioning is that due to their short half-life, they have not many and not popular short-term adverse effects, and all of the proton pump inhibitors have pretty similar adverse effects, no matter if it's omeprazole or other medication. For the first adverse effect that I want to mention, I chose the hardest one for me because of pronunciation of it, because it's Clostridius difficile infection. I'm still not sure if I pronounce it correctly, so I'm sorry if I don't. And not many people hear about those kinds of infection. But what's interesting, they are pretty common because 20% of every antibiotic associated diarrheas are due to the infection. And we will call it C. diff because it's the shortcut for the whole name and it will be way easier for me to mention it. And you can say, infection like infection, organism can protect itself. We have correlation, we have association between using proton pump inhibitors and C. diff infection. And why is that? The most probable reason of that is if you have normally functioning stomach, your gastric acid is a barrier for different types of infections, and as well it comes into your duodenum. It's the first part of small intestine, and it decreases its pH. By decreasing its pH, it kills a bit of bacteria and other microorganisms so they don't overgrowth. And about SIBO will be later, of course, because it's as well in this video. But going back to Clostridius difficile infection, it is correlated with proton pump inhibitors. As well, another risk factors are antibiotics. And really funny and ironic thing is that it has high antibiotic resistance. So it's hard to treat it. It's not easy to diagnose it because we don't have really good methods to diagnose it. And even with high antibiotic resistance, the main treatment used by doctors is antibiotic treatment. Of course, symptoms are not good as well because it involves many watery diarrhea even per day. And the worst part, it can lead to death. Due to colon inflammation, if not treated, it can cause colon inflammation and eventually be fatal. So it's not common cold. It can be really serious. It's not that easy to diagnose. The symptoms are not good at all. Next one will be bone fractures that are pretty established correlation between proton pump inhibitors. Also, there is really good correlation between bone mineral density in men and proton pump inhibitors use. But why the bone fractures can occur due to proton pump inhibitors use, we'll talk later when I will explain how the drugs influence minerals. As I said before, SIBO or fungal growth can be another adverse effects, and they are correlated with proton pump inhibitors. The same reason as C. diff infection, we don't have too much gastric acid going into duodenum. It means that small intestine have really high pH comparing to normally functioning stomach, and it can lead to small intestine bacterial overgrowth or fungal overgrowth. Also, what really surprised me when I was doing the research is that proton pump inhibitors correlate with cardiovascular events like strokes. And how is that? The main potential reason that scientists suggest is inhibition of DDAH. That is dimethylargininase. It's an enzyme that breaks down asymmetric dimethylarginine at ADMA. And ADMA breaks down nitric oxide. So when you inhibit DDAH, more ADMA works and it breaks down more nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is one of the most important vasodilators in our bodies. So nobody with health problems, nobody with cardiovascular problems want to decrease nitric oxide number. Next one that is pretty interesting is acute kidney injury or chronic kidney disease. The most probable reason, the most probable explanation of causing problems with kidneys is acute interstitial nephritis. That is inflammation of interstitium in kidneys. And interstitium is mostly fluid-filled space between barrier of organ and parenchyma, the place where the organ fulfills its function. Renal interstitium is a part of kidneys, so it can have effect on other parts of kidneys, and if it's chronic, it can as well lead to acute kidney injury. And another explanation of how proton pump inhibitors influence on kidneys is hypomagnesemia that is correlated with proton pump inhibitors use. And hypomagnesemia can impair kidneys function by endothelial dysfunction and vascular calcification. And the third reason, proton pump inhibitors are suspected of being toxic to renal tubules. And the last adverse effect before starting deficiencies that it can cause is pneumonia risk. It's due to lower gastric acid content in stomach acid that makes stomach's barrier easier to penetrate, and of course bacteria have easier way to colonize stomach. And if they colonize stomach and appears microaspiration, that is pretty common when we sleep. Microaspiration means that some parts of stomach content come into your lungs, into your respiratory tract. So if those two occur, colonization of stomach, that isn't that hard when you don't have enough gastric acid in your stomach, and microaspiration, it can lead to pneumonia. And now we start deficiencies. And many people will say, oh, what deficiencies? Proton pump inhibitors can cause deficiencies? Yes, they can. Unfortunately, they can many things. They are suspected of many things. We don't have too many really good papers about that. Mostly those are correlations. We can suspect proton pump inhibitors due to their function, due to logical thinking. But those deficiencies that I will mention, some of them are pretty solid. We'll start with the most favorite, the most popular vitamin of people, vitamin C. And gastric acid isn't crucial in absorption of vitamin C, in absorption of ascorbic acid, that is the active form of vitamin C. But it can help with that. And about vitamin C, I don't want to devote too much time for vitamin C because the effect is not really strong. As well as I said before, gastric acid is not necessary for vitamin C absorption, but there is correlation. So we can go to another vitamin that is more interesting, and it's vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is really important neurologically. It occurs only in animals or in dairy. And proton pump inhibitors can decrease absorption of vitamin B12 by two different things. First is bacterial overgrowth. If we have bacterial overgrowth due to proton pump inhibitors, bacteria can consume more cobalamin. Cobalamin is vitamin B12. And second one is pepsin. Vitamin B12 is mostly attached to proteins, and to absorb it, we need to dissolve it from those proteins. And pepsin is enzyme that does that. But pepsin, to function properly, needs pH at level of 1.5 to 2 pH to function, to activate. Enough for vitamins, we'll go straight to minerals. And first will be iron, that can be cause of anemia, as well as everybody knows it's really, really important in body. Iron absorption can be decreased due to those drugs by decreasing gastric acid content, by higher pH in stomach, because non-heme iron, that can be influenced by different things when it's absorbed, is better absorbed when stomach has lower pH. And anemia caused by iron deficiency is correlating with proton pump inhibitors, as well as lower hematocrit and lower hemoglobin. With magnesium, our next guest in this video, the situation is pretty similar because magnesium can be absorbed without gastric acid, yes, but still it's correlated with proton pump inhibitors use. Why? Because magnesium salts can be broken down by gastric acid to ionized magnesium, and ionized magnesium is the form that is absorbed in intestines. And the last one, but not the least, is calcium. The most popular form of calcium in meat, in dairy products, milk, cheese, is calcium phosphate. And calcium phosphate requires gastric acid to be absorbed. There are forms of calcium that don't require gastric acid, like calcium citrate or calcium malate, but calcium carbonate, calcium lactate in tablet form, and calcium phosphate, that is the most important one of those three, requires gastric acid. So there is a next correlation due to the already long list of adverse effects. And at the end of the adverse effects list, I can only mention that there is something called rebound acid hypersecretion. When you stop using proton pump inhibitors and you do it sharply without going step by step with lowering your doses, there can occur hypersecretion of gastric acid that can cause not interesting symptoms and gastric ulcers as well, and other different conditions. And due to the rebound acid hypersecretion occurs higher dependency on the drug. It's harder to stop it, to stop using it. And even if guidelines say about using proton pump inhibitors for 8 to 12 weeks, over 30 or even 50%, depending on research that you read, patients that take proton pump inhibitors take them with no indication to use them because their condition doesn't require it anymore. So there is a really huge group of proton pump inhibitors users that should not take them anymore, but they still take them. And one thing is the fault of the patients, but I would say mostly the fault is on the side of doctors, because they should supervise their patients and stop proton pump inhibitors when they are not necessary anymore. So as you see, proton pump inhibitors can help with short term. I will have on my channel different video where I will talk about alternatives for proton pump inhibitors. Probably it will be my next video. They are dangerous for long-term use, and we need to be really strict with using them and educate patients. And the question is why we don't know too much about adverse effects. And I think there are three reasons. First is no pharmaceutical company will pay for it because they don't want to undermine their own drugs that they sell, and the market is pretty huge. If we talk about 45 million prescriptions only in United States in 1 year, is pretty big money, and nobody will want to undermine it. Other thing is that even if there are studies that suggest and even show high correlation, they can be silenced. With this amount of money, you can silence many people. You can pay them not to post some studies if they are not good for you, or even the companies when they make research about their drug and they see that in the paper appeared really high correlation of their drug and some adverse effect, they can just not post it. And the last one is every doctor has obligation when patient comes to them and says that they have some adverse effects probably due to those drugs, they need to send the information to the drug producer. But as we know, many doctors just ignore patients and they undermine their opinions because they're only patients. I don't say every doctor is bad, that whole modern medicine is evil. I just say that there are people who will try to manipulate different studies, that will try manipulate pharmaceutical market. That's why we need to be aware of different adverse effects and use drugs only when they are necessary. Thank you for watching. Subscribe my channel if you need personalized health guidance. I offer one-on-one consultations where I analyze your health, lifestyle and lab tests to create a customized treatment plan that actually works for you. If you are interested, my mail is in description. Contact me and I will give you all necessary things to get you through the whole consultation and to help you with your health problems.